a burning Mercedes teetering on a cliff edge. Inside, a billionaire tech CEO trapped and bleeding. Outside, a widowed tow truck driver risking his life for a stranger. What starts as a desperate rescue on a rain-slicked highway turns into a multi-million-dollar marriage proposal, unearthing corporate betrayal and a deadly conspiracy. The rain on the Pacific Coast Highway wasn't just falling. It was attacking the windshield of Nicholas Foster's rusted Ford F450 tow truck. It was a torrential Tuesday night in November, the kind of weather that kept sensible people indoors and kept independent contractors like Nicholas working double shifts. At 34, Nicholas's life had been reduced to a simple, grueling equation. Hours worked equaled the ability to keep the lights on and buy the expensive asthma medication his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, desperately needed. 2 years had passed since his wife, Sarah, lost her battle with ovarian cancer. She left behind a gaping hole in Nicholas's heart and a mountain of medical debt that suffocated him daily. He had traded his career as an Oakland firefighter for the solitary, flexible life of a nighttime recovery driver, just so he could be there to drop Lily off at kindergarten every morning. The dashboard clock glowed 11:42 p.m. as Nicholas navigated the treacherous curves south of Half Moon Bay. The radio crackled with static, warning of mudslides. Suddenly, blinding headlights flooded his rearview mirror. A dark SUV blew past him, easily doing 80 on the slick pavement. Nicholas muttered a curse, tapping his brakes, but his irritation quickly turned to ice-cold dread when he saw what the SUV was chasing. 100 yards ahead, a sleek black Mercedes-Benz S-Class was desperately swerving to maintain control. The SUV accelerated, slamming brutally into the rear quarter panel of the Mercedes. It wasn't reckless driving. It was an intentional PIT maneuver. The heavy luxury sedan spun wildly. The tires shrieked over the howling wind as the Mercedes slammed through the rusted steel guardrail. Nicholas slammed on his brakes, his massive truck fishtailing to a halt just feet from the shredded metal barrier. He threw the truck into park, grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight and the medical jump bag he still kept from his firefighter days, and sprinted into the freezing rain. The SUV that caused the crash was already gone, its taillights swallowed by the storm. Nicholas reached the edge of the cliff. The drop to the rocky Pacific surf below was at least 200 feet. The Mercedes hadn't fallen all the way. It was miraculously wedged in a thick grove of cypress trees about 30 feet down the steep, muddy embankment. Smoke and steam billowed from the crumpled hood. "Hey!" Nicholas roared over the wind, slipping as he scrambled down the muddy slope. "Is anyone alive in there?" No answer. As he got closer, the smell of raw gasoline hit him like a physical punch. A spark from the mangled electrical system was sputtering near the fuel line. He had less than 2 minutes. Nicholas reached the driver's side. The window was shattered. Inside, the airbags had deployed, hanging like deflated white ghosts. The driver, an older man in a chauffeur's uniform, was slumped over the wheel. Nicholas checked his pulse. Nothing. His neck was positioned at an unnatural angle. A faint groan came from the back seat. Nicholas forced the rear door open, the metal groaning in protest. In the dim light of his flashlight, he saw her. A woman in her early 30s, wearing a tailored charcoal suit, was pinned between the front seat and the crushed door pillar. A deep gash crossed her forehead, blood staining her white silk blouse. "Don't move," Nicholas said, his voice dropping into the calm, authoritative register he used to use in burning buildings. "I've got you." My leg," she gasped, her eyes fluttering open. Piercing blue eyes, clouded with pain and shock. trapped. Nicholas wedged himself into the tight space. He could see her ankle was pinned beneath the crushed floorboard. The spark near the engine suddenly flared into a small tongue of fire. "I'm going to have to pull you hard," Nicholas warned, pulling a pry bar from his belt. "It's going to hurt like hell, but this car is going to burn." He jammed the pry bar under the seat track and threw his entire body weight into it. The metal shrieked and gave way just an inch, but an inch was all he needed. He grabbed the woman by her shoulders and pulled. She screamed in agony, but she came free. Nicholas scooped her into his arms. She was surprisingly light. He scrambled out of the wreckage, his boots slipping on the mud, the woman clinging to his heavy canvas jacket. "Just hold on," he grunted, driving his legs into the treacherous incline. They were 15 feet up when the fire reached the fuel line. The explosion didn't sound like it did in the movies. It was a dull, earth-shaking thump, followed by a rush of intense heat that pushed Nicholas forward. He threw himself over the woman, shielding her body with his own, as debris rained down around them in the mud. For a moment, there was only the sound of the rain hissing against the burning wreckage below. Nicholas rolled off her, coughing. "Are you okay?" She looked up at him, her face smeared with mud, blood, and rain. Her breathing was shallow. They pushed us," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It wasn't an accident." Before Nicholas could ask her what she meant, her eyes rolled back, and she lost consciousness. He carried her up to the highway, laid her gently in the heated cab of his tow truck, and grabbed his radio to call highway patrol. As he bandaged her head, he noticed a heavy platinum ring on her right hand, engraved with a crest. He didn't know it yet, but the woman bleeding on his passenger seat was Victoria Hayes, the 32-year-old billionaire CEO of Hayes Biomedical, one of Silicon Valley's most cutthroat pharmaceutical developers. And he had just inserted himself directly into the crosshairs of her enemies. It took exactly 8 days for Nicholas's world to collide with hers again. The storm had passed, leaving behind a bitter, damp chill in Nicholas's cramped 2-bedroom apartment in San Mateo. It was a Thursday morning. He had just finished making Lily a bowl of oatmeal and was reviewing a final notice from the hospital billing department when a sharp, authoritative knock rattled his front door. Nicholas opened it to find 2 enormous men in immaculate black suits standing on his worn welcome mat. Behind them, standing with the aid of a sleek carbon fiber cane, was the woman from the crash. She looked entirely different now. The blood and mud were gone, replaced by flawless, understated makeup and a beige cashmere coat that probably cost more than Nicholas's truck. A small white bandage on her forehead was the only visible reminder of the wreck. "Mr. Foster," she said. Her voice was smooth, commanding, but carrying a faint tremor of vulnerability. "May I come in?" Nicholas blinked, wiping grease off his hands with a rag. Sure. Come on in. Excuse the mess." Victoria stepped into the small living room. Her eyes quickly scanned the peeling wallpaper, the stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter, and finally rested on Lily, who was sitting at the table, staring at the strangers with wide eyes. "Lily, sweetie, go to your room and play with your blocks for a minute," Nicholas said softly. Lily grabbed her bowl and scampered down the hall. Nicholas turned back to the billionaire. "The police told me your name, Victoria Hayes. They said you made a full recovery. I'm glad." "I survived, Mr. Foster." "Survival and recovery are 2 different things," Victoria said, leaning heavily on her cane as she sat on his faded sofa. "My driver, Thomas, did not survive. He had been with my family for 20 years. "I'm sorry," Nicholas said gently. "I tried. He was gone before I got down there." "I know. The paramedics told me what you did. You stayed. You pulled me out of a burning car when anyone else would have run." She looked at him intently, those icy blue eyes piercing right through him. "You saved my life, Nicholas, and now I need you to save it again." Nicholas frowned, crossing his arms. "I don't understand. If you're in danger, you have money. Hire these guys." He gestured to the 2 stoic bodyguards by the door. "Hire an army." "Security can't protect me from a boardroom," Victoria said, her tone hardening. "And they can't protect me from the law." She opened her designer bag and pulled out a thick manila folder, dropping it onto his coffee table. "3 months ago, I initiated a hostile takeover of a rival firm. It's a move that will double the valuation of my company, but it threatens a lot of very powerful people. Chief among them is my chief operating officer, Richard Stanton." Victoria's jaw tightened at the name. "Richard is also my fiancé." Nicholas raised an eyebrow. "Your fiancé tried to run you off a cliff? Richard is a sociopath with a brilliant business mind. Our engagement was a strategic alliance to keep the board of directors happy. He never wanted to marry me. He wanted power of attorney. If I am incapacitated, say, in a severe car crash, or if I die before the merger is complete, Richard inherits my voting shares. He takes complete control of Hayes Biomedical." She leaned forward. "He arranged that crash, Nicholas. I know he did, but I can't prove it yet. I need time to gather the evidence, to trace the money to the driver of that SUV. But I am vulnerable. If I have another accident tomorrow, he wins. So break off the engagement," Nicholas said simply. "Fire him. If I fire him without absolute proof of his crimes, the board will oust me for erratic behavior, and if I just break the engagement, I still have no next of kin. My parents are dead. As my business partner and current proxy, Richard still holds the keys if I end up in a coma." Victoria took a deep breath. "Unless I have a husband." The silence in the small apartment was deafening. The ticking of the cheap wall clock suddenly sounded like a hammer. "A husband supersedes a fiancé and a business partner in all medical and legal proxies," Victoria explained, her voice remarkably calm for what she was proposing. "I need a husband, Nicholas, immediately. Someone Richard cannot buy, intimidate, or predict. Someone who is physically capable of defending himself, and someone who possesses a documented, undeniable moral compass." "You want me to marry you?" Nicholas said flatly, thinking this must be a trauma-induced hallucination. "I'm proposing a legally binding marriage of convenience. A contract," Victoria corrected. "You will move into my estate in Atherton. You will accompany me to the public events. You will play the role of the devoted savior who fell in love with the woman he rescued. It will create a media frenzy, which is exactly what I want. The press will act as a shield. Richard won't dare touch me while the whole world is watching our fairy tale romance." Nicholas let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Lady, you are out of your mind. I'm a tow truck driver. I have a kid. I'm not playing bodyguard/fake husband in some billionaire soap opera." "Look at the file, Nicholas," Victoria said softly. Nicholas hesitated, then reached down and opened the manila folder. Inside was a cashier's check. It was made out to him. The amount was $1 million. "That is the signing bonus," Victoria said, watching his eyes widen. "Upon completion of our marriage, which will last exactly 1 year, after which we will quietly divorce, I will place an additional $4 million into a trust fund for Lily. Furthermore, from this moment you say I do, Hayes Biomedical will provide full, premium medical coverage for your daughter for the rest of her life. No more fighting with insurance companies. No more late notices. Nicholas stared at the check. $1 million. It was an abstract concept. It meant Sarah's medical debt, gone in a keystroke. It meant Lily could go to the best schools. It meant he would never have to work a 14-hour shift in the freezing rain again. Why me? Nicholas asked, his voice thick. You could hire an actor, a mercenary. Because I trust you, Victoria said, dropping her corporate mask for just a second. When that car was burning, you didn't know I was a CEO. You didn't know I had money. You just saw a human being in pain, and you threw your body over mine to protect me from the fire. Richard surrounds himself with sharks. I need a shield. Nicholas looked down the hallway. He could hear the faint sound of Lily singing to her stuffed animals. He thought of the terrifying wheeze in her chest when her asthma flared up, and the panic of checking his bank account to see if he could afford the inhaler. He looked back at Victoria Hayes. She wasn't just a scared victim. She was a predator, backed into a corner, looking for a way to survive. 1 year, Nicholas said, his voice hard. And my daughter stays out of the press. Completely. Agreed, Victoria said. Nicholas picked up the pen resting beside the folder. He didn't know the world of corporate espionage, high society, or cutthroat billionaires. But he knew how to protect people. He signed his name on the dotted line. The ink was barely dry when Victoria's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her expression hardening into ice. Pack your bags, Mr. Foster, Victoria said, standing up. My fiancé just found out I'm alive, and he's on his way to my house right now. The gates of Victoria's Atherton estate parted like the jaws of a modern fortress. As Nicholas drove his rusted F450 up the winding, immaculate driveway, he felt the glaring disparity between his world and hers. The mansion was a sprawling masterpiece of glass, steel, and imported Italian stone. For 6-year-old Lily, whose entire universe had been a cramped San Mateo apartment, it looked like a literal castle. Daddy, do princesses live here? Lily asked, her nose pressed against the smudged passenger window. Just a boss, kiddo, Nicholas muttered, putting the truck in park behind a row of sleek security vehicles. A very big boss. Their transition into Victoria's world was ruthlessly efficient. Within 48 hours, Nicholas and Victoria were legally married in a closed-door ceremony at the San Mateo County Courthouse. The press release was distributed immediately to major outlets, accompanied by a carefully staged photograph of Nicholas holding Victoria's hand as she left Stanford Medical Center. The media swallowed the narrative whole, the hero and the heiress. But inside the walls of the Atherton estate, the fairy tale dissolved into a high-stakes tactical operation. Victoria transformed her formal dining room into a war room. Documents, schematics, and financial records covered the mahogany table. It was here that Nicholas finally met the man who wanted his new wife dead. Richard Stanton arrived unannounced on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. He was a tall, impossibly well-groomed man in his late 40s wearing a bespoke Brioni suit. He bypassed the security detail with the arrogant familiarity of a man who believed he already owned the place. Nicholas was in the kitchen pouring apple juice for Lily when Richard strolled in. You must be the mechanic, Richard said, his voice dripping with aristocratic condescension. He didn't offer his hand. I must admit, when Victoria told me she eloped with the man who towed her car, I assumed she had suffered a traumatic brain injury. Now, seeing the reality of it, I'm certain of it. Nicholas slowly set the juice glass down. He wiped his hands on a dish towel, his eyes locked onto Richard's. He remembered the smell of burning gasoline and the sight of Victoria bleeding in the wreckage. I'm a recovery driver, actually, Nicholas said, his voice dangerously low. I specialize in pulling wrecks out of ditches. You'd be surprised what kind of trash I find down there. Richard's smirk faltered, his eyes hardening into twin chips of flint. He stepped closer, dropping the polite facade. Enjoy the mansion while it lasts, Mr. Foster. Victoria is playing a desperate game of chess, and she's using a pawn to block a king. The merger happens in 3 weeks. When I take control of Hayes Biomedical, I will personally see to it that she is institutionalized for her paranoia, and you will be back in the gutter where you belong. Is that a threat, Richard? Victoria's voice cut through the room like a whip. She stood in the doorway, leaning on her cane, her posture rigid and commanding. Just a reality check for your new acquisition, darling, Richard replied, smoothing his tie. The board of directors is already questioning your mental fitness. A shotgun wedding to a blue-collar widower? It reeks of instability. I'll see you at the emergency shareholder meeting on the 15th. Bring your husband. The board would love to meet him. As Richard walked out, the silence in the kitchen was suffocating. Victoria slumped slightly against the doorframe, the adrenaline leaving her system. He's moving up the timeline, she whispered, rubbing her temples. He knows I'm looking into the crash. If he gets a majority vote at the shareholder meeting to declare me unfit, the marriage won't matter. He'll strip my voting rights. Nicholas walked over to the war room table, looking at the complex flowcharts Victoria had drawn up. He needs 51% to oust you, Nicholas noted, studying the numbers. He has 20. The board gives him 40. He just needs to convince Vanguard that you're crazy. And he will, Victoria said bitterly, unless I can prove he orchestrated the crash. But the police found nothing. The SUV vanished. The crash investigators ruled it a tragic hit-and-run, likely a drunk driver. Nicholas frowned. His mind drifted back to the mud, the rain, and the mangled metal of the Mercedes. He was a firefighter and a mechanic long before he was a fake husband. He knew how fires started, and he knew how cars died. Victoria, Nicholas said slowly, when you crashed, did the brakes fail, or did the steering lock? Victoria looked up, surprised by the technical question. The steering. Thomas was screaming that the wheel wouldn't turn. Then the dashboard went completely black. Why? Because a PIT maneuver from an SUV shouldn't completely disable the electronics of a top-tier Mercedes before the impact even happens, Nicholas said, grabbing his coat. The police looked for a hit-and-run. They didn't look for a hack. The emergency shareholder meeting was held in the glass-enclosed penthouse boardroom of the Hayes Biomedical Tower in San Francisco. The room smelled of expensive cologne, nervous sweat, and predatory anticipation. Victoria sat at the head of the massive oak table, wearing a striking crimson suit, a deliberate choice to project power. Nicholas sat silently beside her in a tailored charcoal suit that Victoria had purchased for him. He looked every bit the devoted, stoic husband, though beneath the table, his hand had rested securely over the manila folder on his lap. Richard stood at the front of the room, laser pointer in hand, finishing a devastating presentation. Point 1. Victoria's erratic behavior post-accident. Point 2. The sudden, unvetted marriage to a financially distressed tow truck driver. Point 3. The alleged paranoia that Richard was out to get her. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, Richard concluded, offering a deeply faux sympathetic sigh. We all love Victoria, but the trauma of the accident has fractured her judgment. For the sake of this company, for the sake of the upcoming multi-billion-dollar merger, we must invoke Clause 4A of the Corporate Charter. I motion for an immediate vote of no confidence, transferring proxy control to myself until Victoria undergoes a full psychiatric evaluation. A murmur of agreement rippled through the older men and women in the room. The representative from Vanguard checked his watch, looking convinced. "I second the motion," a board member muttered. "Before we vote," Victoria said, her voice echoing off the glass walls, "I believe my husband has something to add." Richard rolled his eyes. "Victoria, please. This is a corporate boardroom, not a garage. Mr. Foster has no standing here. Actually, as of this morning, I am a proxy shareholder," Nicholas said, standing up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He commanded the room with the easy, grounded authority of a man who had stared down burning buildings. Nicholas opened the manila folder and slid a stack of glossy photographs across the table. "After the crash, the police impounded the wreckage of the Mercedes," Nicholas began, pacing slowly. "They treated it as a standard traffic fatality, but I pull wrecks from ditches for a living. I know what a mechanical failure looks like. So 3 days ago, I hired an independent forensic engineer from Stanford to examine the car's engine control unit." Richard's face twitched. Just a millimeter, but Nicholas saw it. "The Mercedes didn't lose control because of the SUV," Nicholas continued. "The SUV was just the cleanup crew. The forensic report shows that a secondary, aftermarket cellular receiver was spliced into the car's drive-by-wire system. Someone remotely killed the power steering and locked the brakes while the car was doing 70 miles an hour. Murmurs erupted around the table. The Vanguard representative sat up straight. "This is absurd," Richard snapped, his face flushing. "A conspiracy theory concocted by a desperate woman and her bought-and-paid-for thug." "Maybe," Nicholas said, pulling a thumb drive from his pocket and plugging it into the boardroom's central console. But the receiver required a cellular signal to execute the override. It pinged a local cell tower in Half Moon Bay exactly 3 seconds before the crash. We subpoenaed the carrier records. A document flashed onto the massive screen behind Richard. It was a telecom log. The signal that disabled Victoria's car originated from a burner phone, Nicholas said, stepping closer to Richard. A burner phone that was purchased at a convenience store in Palo Alto, and thanks to the store's security cameras. The slide changed. A high-resolution security still showed Richard Stanton, wearing a baseball cap but undeniably recognizable, purchasing the phone with cash. The boardroom erupted. "You son of a bitch," Victoria whispered, detonanted. Standing up, Richard lunged toward the console to pull the drive, but Nicholas was faster. He stepped into Richard's path, catching the executive by the lapels of his Brioni suit and slamming him hard against the oak table. "I told you," Nicholas growled, his face inches from Richard's. "I specialize in pulling trash out of the wreckage." The doors to the boardroom swung open. 4 officers from the San Francisco Police Department, accompanied by federal agents from the SEC, strode into the room. "Richard Stanton," the lead detective said, pulling a pair of steel cuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for the murder of Thomas Vance, the attempted murder of Victoria Hayes, and corporate fraud." As they hauled a screaming, protesting Richard out of the room, the stunned silence in the boardroom was absolute. Victoria looked at the board members, her icy composure fully restored. "Now," Victoria said calmly, smoothing her crimson jacket, "are there any further questions regarding my mental fitness, or shall we proceed with the merger?" 3 months later. The California sun was setting over the Atherton estate, casting a warm golden glow across the manicured lawns. Nicholas sat on the edge of the stone patio, watching Lily chase a golden retriever puppy, a recent gift from Victoria, around the rose garden. The media frenzy had died down. Richard Stanton had taken a plea deal to avoid the death penalty, and Hayes Biomedical's merger had pushed the company's stock to record highs. According to their contract, Nicholas and Victoria had 9 months left before they quietly divorced and went their separate ways. But as Nicholas watched Victoria walk out onto the patio, carrying 2 glasses of iced tea, he knew the contract was the furthest thing from his mind. She wore a simple sundress, her bare feet padding softly against the stone. She handed him a glass and sat down next to him, their shoulders brushing. "The trust fund for Lily was finalized today," Victoria said softly, watching the little girl laugh as the puppy tackled her. "And her medical coverage is locked in, irrevocably." "Thank you," Nicholas said. "You kept your end of the deal." "I did," Victoria agreed. She took a sip of her tea, her blue eyes turning to look at him. The cold, corporate armor she had worn since the day they met was entirely gone. "But I was reviewing the contract last night, Nicholas, and I found a flaw." Nicholas raised an eyebrow. "A flaw? Your lawyers drafted it." "It stipulates that we must remain married for 1 year," she murmured, reaching out and gently taking his rough, calloused hand in hers. "It doesn't stipulate that we actually have to get divorced at the end of it." Nicholas looked at the billionaire CEO. He saw the woman he had pulled from the burning wreckage, the woman who had fought a boardroom of wolves, and the woman who now read bedtime stories to his daughter every night. "Is that a corporate proposal, Ms. Hayes?" Nicholas asked, a slow smile spreading across his face. "No," Victoria whispered, leaning in until her forehead rested against his. "That's a real one." Did you expect that boardroom twist? From a burning cliffside rescue to exposing a billionaire's deadly corporate sabotage, Nicholas and Victoria proved that sometimes the strongest alliances are forged in the darkest fires. If you loved this intense story of survival, loyalty, and unexpected romance, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video, share it with your friends who love a good thriller, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more incredible real-life drama stories.